Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An original adaptation written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 9. The Wolves of Winter. After his night spent with the friendly folk of the village inn and the wonderful pie made by Rosie the innkeeper, Gawain awoke feeling well rested and refreshed. The night of comfort by a roaring fire had reminded him of the joys of such things, and with each buckle he fastened on his armour, he felt it might be longer and longer before he got to partake in such pleasures again. "Still," said his inner voice, "you're here to undertake a mission, not for a nice bimble in the countryside." But what the villagers had told him about the green men and how they could not be defeated was nothing short of worrying, and only redoubled his temptation to stay. "Get off your arse and go," said the voice in his head more insistently, and he knew that it was right. Throwing on his crimson cloak and taking up his sword, shield and axe, he set out to find Gringolet and continue his journey. The biting cold of the November air as he opened the door almost made him reconsider and slink back upstairs, but he steeled his mind, set his shoulders, and walked out into the winter wind. "Besides," said the voice, "delaying will only take you later into winter, which means this is about as warm as you are going to get." This thought was both motivating and melancholy, but it was also undeniable, and so Gawain mounted Gringolet and began. Turning back to the town for a final look, he was surprised to see a figure standing outside the gates. They were hooded and robed, and though Gawain could not see their face, he could tell that he was being stared at intently. He was just about to call out, when a crow's caw from nearby made Gringolet start, and Gawain looked round. When he looked back, the figure was gone. Thinking no more of it, Gawain hunched his shoulders against the cold and urged Gringolet on. After a few hours in the saddle, his body and bones were not so chilled, and things did not seem so bad after all. Remembering the warm Wirral welcome he'd received the day before, he dared to dream that the next village might hold a similar reception, and possibly another pie like the one Rosie had baked. A man can dream. He picked his path north and east, heading inland and upwards on his hunt for the Green Chapel. In truth, he had no real inkling of where to go, and his intention was just to keep riding until he found some sign of people and ask them whether they had heard of the place. Before he could check the horizon for any signs of civilization, though, Gringolet's ears picked up, and he made a nervous, whickering snort. Gawain froze in the saddle. He'd ridden Gringolet for several years, and he'd long since learned to trust the creature's instincts. Rather than wasting time trying to calm the beast, or foolishly asking him what was the matter and disrupting the horse's hearing, he stayed silent and still. Gringolet's ears swiveled and flicked, and he gave another nervous snort. Still, Gawain could hear nothing. On the third time, Gawain heard it. A long, low growl. It was a long way off, but clearly too close for comfort if Gawain could hear it, and Gringolet was so uneasy. He was too well seasoned a soldier to waste time scanning the horizon for shapes. After all, determinedly looking in one location tends to leave you incapable of looking anywhere else. Instead, he let his eyes drift to the middle distance, taking in as much of the landscape as possible, and waited for signs of movement. There! Now knowing where to look, he trained his eyes on the source of the motion. It was large, but low down and on all fours. Not close enough to be an immediate threat, but still close enough that he could make out a distinct shape just below the tree line. Maybe a boar? Maybe something else? Another growl interrupted his thoughts, closer now, much closer, and accompanied by another. Gawain felt panic pulse through him. This was not a lone creature. Gringolet was far too well trained to rear up, but he gave a few sharp dancing steps, lifting his hooves up high. Again, Gawain did not doubt the horse's excellent instincts, but dug his heels in and urged the warhorse to a run. In a few short strides they were putting on a good pace, but out of the corner of his eyes Gawain could see sleek shapes following after. He snatched glances behind him when he could, but all he saw were grey blurs, 10, 12, maybe 20 of them. They looked like wolves, but no wolf was that big, and they moved too solidly. A running wolf is all sleek, flowing grace, dancing over the earth. These looked like they would charge through the earth and leave a dent behind them. For now they weren't close enough to attack Gawain, but Gawain knew the attack would come if the pair dropped their pace. For a while, Gawain let Gringolet pick the path, trusting the horse to follow a route he could run safely. But after a few moments he saw smoke on the crest of a nearby hill and steered Gringolet in that direction. Walls were what he needed now. Good, strong walls. As they got closer, Gawain saw a village. But unlike the picturesque perfection of the day before, this village was fortified and forbidding. He could see ditches dug all around the place, and a palisade of fire-hardened wooden stakes ringed its outer borders. "Definitely not a place for pie," said the voice in his head. With the snarling shapes still hounding their heels, though, Gawain was in no position to be picky, and he hurled himself and his horse towards the gates, which were resolutely closed. They were not large gates, barely more than those common in farmers' fields, and held closed with rope, but they were just too high to jump, and they looked solid and well made. Gawain could see there were more sharpened stakes facing through them as well. They were charging forwards at a breakneck pace, and if those gates did not open, they would crash right into them. The only other choice was to turn and face the pursuing creatures alone, which even for a mounted knight in armour did not seem appealing. "Open the gates!" he yelled. "Let us through!" He waved his arms and shouted and hallooed, but still the gates stayed shut. With no good choices, Gawain's mind frantically ran through his available options, and a madcap plan made his way into his mind. "Desperate times call for desperate measures," said the voice in his head, and reaching behind him he pulled the green axe from its straps, holding it in one hand and sighting on the rope that lashed the gates shut. It was a stupid plan, a frantic plan, 1,000,000-to-1 plan, but it was the only plan he had. He threw the axe. When throwing a spinning axe, the odds are never in your favour. It only really has one pointy part that can land with any useful effect, and that's proportionally very small compared with the rest of it. Add to that the fact that it's spinning, so more than 3/4 of the time the blade edge is facing firmly in the wrong direction. Getting the axe's edge to be the part that hits the target instead of the rest is a tricky business of knowing exactly how far away you are and exactly how many times the axe will spin in the air. Standing on your own 2 feet with a target that doesn't move, a bit of practice will show you the right distance to land your shot perfectly 7 times out of 10. Hurtling towards a tiny target on horseback with a 5-foot-long monster-made polearm is less than ideal. The axe went soaring end over end, and time seemed to slow as Gawain watched it spin. He saw the axe slicing through the air, saw the villagers behind the gate throw themselves for cover, felt Gringolet's powerful muscles shift and stretch beneath him, heard the snarling snort from the creatures behind. The axe hit home exactly where he intended it. "That was lucky," said the voice in his head. "I'll bet you couldn't do that again." The green-edged blade snicked neatly through the rope, and the gate leaned open just in time for Gawain and Gringolet to sail through, grabbing the still quivering axe as they went. Gawain hauled back on Gringolet's reins, bringing the horse to a rearing stop and turning him to face the way they'd come. As the villagers scrambled to shut the gates, Gawain strained for a sign of the creatures who had chased him. But there was nothing to see. He'd expected to see the slathering beasts hurling themselves towards the gates, or at least their backs as they slank away into the distance, deprived of their kill. But there was nothing, no sign of them at all. Before he could think on that further, though, a ringing voice brought him roughly back from his reverie. "You flaming, half-headed moron!" came the voice, and looking to his left, Gawain saw a small, round man striding up to him, his face red with rage. "What do you mean, breaking down our gate like this?" "I meant," Gawain began, his temper flaring, "to avoid these creatures and keep my horse safe." His mind was still spinning from the panicked chase, not finished more than 1 minute. "Oh, well, I'm so glad you and your horse are safe," replied the man, his voice dripping with sarcastic sugar. "May we fetch you a cup of wine to ease your worried spirit?" Gawain was only half paying attention, his eyes still scanning for any sign of those creatures, but he felt quite instantly that he did not like this man. "Why did you not open the gates when you saw me?" he asked the man. "Could you not see that I needed help?" The man, though, was not paying attention, but looking at the gates in dismay. "Have you any idea what you've done?" he went on, his face now a deep burgundy. "I ought to have you strung up, you goat-headed fool!" Gawain felt a white-hot flush of anger run through him. His veins were still coursing with adrenaline, his chest was heaving, his eyes were wary for danger, and the man was pulling on all the wrong strings. "You would do well not to insult a knight of the court of Camelot," he said, his voice coming low and steady. The man's face changed colour again, a rich purple, as his anger redoubled. "Is that a threat?" he asked. Gawain had meant it more as a warning, but he realised he was still astride his warhorse, decked out in armour, a huge axe held tightly in his hand. To anyone looking, he was undoubtedly threatening. The purple-faced man, though, did not seem threatened. "Because we don't take well to threats round here." He raised his finger and waved it menacingly in Gawain's direction. "I don't care who you are, lad. You'll not bring danger to me or mine. I'll fight you myself if I have to. I don't care how big your axe may be." Suddenly, Gawain understood how the Green Knight must have felt, looking down on him from atop that horse what felt like a lifetime ago. Here he was, a knighted warrior dressed in full armour on a well-trained warhorse with weapons in hands. This tiny man who barely reached the horse's shoulder couldn't have offered less of a threat for all his words. The sheer sight of him rearing up at Gawain in impotent fury was nothing short of ridiculous. "Wait," said the voice in his head. "It is ridiculous." Gawain looked at the man, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw something besides anger in his eyes. Fear. But it was not fear for Gawain. He looked around the rest of the village. In the centre of the main square sat a mounted knight, probably the only one they had ever seen or ever would see, being bawled out by a man half his size. It was quite a sight. All eyes should be facing that way for entertainment value alone, and yet not one person was looking in their direction. Instead, they anxiously looked out. Children and older folk were being hurried inside, and Gawain saw other villagers, 2 women and a man, were hurriedly fastening the gate with fresh rope. What would make a man so frightened that fighting a fully armoured knight seems like no threat? Asked the voice within him. What could inspire such fear in these people? He took a deep breath and stilled his senses, still straining from the chase. He thought of what Arthur had said to him about making the lives of those around him better, and he knew what he had to do. "How long have these creatures been terrorising your village?" he asked the man. "And how can I help you be free of them?" Thank you for listening. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story consultant was Miriam Sarin. Music was Tectonic by Saedra, downloaded via Uppbeat. It was a Parable Arts production.